Thank you for listening to Passing Perspective with Death's Apprentice. Being that this is a podcast about death, dying, and grief, some topics discussed may be triggering for some or not suitable for younger listeners, hence the explicit rating. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to Passing Perspectives. I am your host for this next half hour, Death's Apprentice. And to all my listeners, thanks for listening. The last few episodes, I have spoke on a variety of topics from planning your final wishes to who is who in the death industry, with some horror facts thrown in there. Last episode, I ended with the question about body disposal, and I told you all about the funeral pyre in Colorado, and hopefully it got you thinking about ideas for your own decisions on body disposal. If you're thinking about body disposal, well, you are in luck, because that's what this episode is all about. This is not too in-depth because I will probably go into more detail about some of these individually a little bit later, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the options out there. Sometimes it seems like a new option pops up every day. And these days, there are so many options to cover all your remaining needs. This is definitely an industry to watch closely. Along with the topic of body disposals, I'm also going to touch on some of the types of memorials that may also be available to you. These can vary widely, especially based on which body disposal method you go with. So from cremation to military honors, grab your notebook, because today we are learning about body disposals and memorials. Whether you're pre-planning your own services or planning a loved one's services after they have passed, you will have to make some decisions about what to do with the remains. And even if you want to have a memorial service, that's another decision. It seems like these days more and more people are opting for private services or no services at all. My personal opinion on this is that there should always be some kind of celebration, but that's another episode. I'm going to start this with body disposals, though, and what kind of legal body disposal you can find around these parts, and some other options that are not so legal yet, or at least not widely available. As I said before, there are so many options in the area of body disposal and even disposal of cremains that I probably can't even name them all in one episode. I'm going to break this topic down and start with the most popular two options that everyone is aware of at this point: burial and cremation. According to some internet statistics, the top choice of body disposal is cremation, and the numbers are steadily increasing year after year. With burial, traditional burial has been steadily declining, being replaced not only by cremation, but with other forms also rising. Natural burial has gone up, as well as body donation and human composting. There are a couple of big reasons for the shift in choices. One is pricing, with the cost of cremation often being much lower than a traditional burial. The other is environmental impact. Traditional burial is what most people imagine when they imagine a funeral, and it has been the staple in death care for quite a while. It's the fancy casket and burial plot in the cemetery or in some other family area. It involves a vault and gravedigger, flowers, music, clergy, maybe a church or a chapel, and embalming. It is the image we all see in our heads when we hear the word funeral. Even though it still comes in second as far as disposal choices go, the face of it is changing, contributing to its decline as the way it has been. Natural burial has been on the rise, with environmental concerns being a consideration in decision making. People are going with natural burial options more and more. These types of burial options include a myriad of choices ranging from not being embalmed to being buried in a natural cemetery or plot with or without a casket, or a special type of casket, or a vault or no vault. It doesn't stop there though. These options are expanding, and while mostly still in prototype phases and not generally available at this point, there are burial pods grow trees from your remains in like biodegradable coffins, and mushroom suits and mushroom coffins that speed up decomposition with mushrooms. These options are pretty much helping with decomposition and kind of speeding it along. Along these lines, but not exactly a burial per se, is human composting. Hitting the market running and now legal in 10 states, this option is a process that breaks you down into compost. Yep, compost. Like your kitchen waste and what you put in your garden. Personally, I am extremely curious about this process and will be looking into this further. I believe the process takes a few months, and when done, you generally get a square cubic foot bag of compost to spread your loved one in a garden. Now, switching to the cremation front, with its rise in popularity, it shouldn't be surprising that more environmental cremation options are also available now. Cremation as it is not the most environmentally friendly option, even if it is the cheapest. Between the fuel used and the retorts, the temperatures needed to cremate remains, toxic remains from the process, and greenhouse gases and other pollutants, it definitely has a negative environmental impact, though slightly better than traditional burial. Some of the emerging options in body disposal along the lines of cremation, though, not quite as harmful to the environment. These include variations of water and chemical processes that break down remains similar to cremation but with less of an impact. These can include alkaline hydrolysis, promession, and resumation. From the information I have found so far, these each represent only slight differences in processing chemicals with some water involved. Alkaline hydrolysis, also known as aquamation, is like liquid cremation, using mostly water with alkaline chemicals. Promession, on the other hand, is different in the fact it is freeze-drying the remains, and instead of producing ashes, is producing particles of organic material that is better for the environment. Resumation is more similar to alkaline hydrolysis or aquamation, but it uses heated water and potassium hydroxide to liquefy the remains. Potassium hydroxide, aka KOH, in layman's terms, it is lye. Yep, lye, the base of most soaps. I can't even tell you how cool that was to research while having a FaceTime wine date with my science teacher friend who made me look up potassium hydroxide. This is essentially dissolving a body in lye, which, as a side note, is an alkaline. Speaking of science, the next step in our exploration of body disposal moves to body donations. This can range from just donating your body to science, which the previously mentioned friend is all for on her option. From what I have found, this can end up in a few ways: a body farm, organ removal, possibly donation, medical school dissection, and any other random scientific uses. There are other options, but these may be harder to plan for. There is donating your body to research studies, but this option is highly dependent on a lot of factors, with timing especially, which brings me to the last part of body donation, and that includes mummification and plastination. These are just about what you expect. We all know what mummies are. Horror genre much? This technique, along with plastination, which is the preservation of biological specimens by replacing water and fat with silicone polymers or other resins, both are somewhat forms of embalming in a sense. Embalming is removing organs and flushing the veins with chemicals to make remains look more lifelike and add color, while mummification is similar but more of a drying process after organs and liquids are removed or decomposed. Mummification does happen naturally. This is also similar to taxidermy, and while I am not sure this is a viable option, it did make my imagination. These forms are mostly used as preservation long-term and mainly seen rarely outside of the science realm. And while I've heard about cryogenics, I believe I need to look into this more. I know this is a thing, although you hear about it less and less, and I'm not sure thawing is effective at this point. Our next step in the body disposal journey moves to less earth-based options. These include the sea and space. There aren't as many options here. Basically, you can be launched into space via a rocket and left to float there as one with the universe. Either it be Spock-like in a space casket or your cremated remains. This is a costly option. I believe after researching this will be its own episode. Moving on to the water options. We start with sea burials, which is essentially the same as water burials. This is the disposal of remains in the ocean. It can be done by ship, boat, or aircraft and generally involves the Navy. This is different from scattering the ashes at sea. Speaking of scattering ashes, another option along those lines is an internal reef. From what I have found, this is not what I expected at all. Not at all. This is more of a monument reef for you to scatter cremains at. The last of our body disposal options to visit is in the sky, but not quite space and not quite in the sky. This method is exposure and includes the sky burial I mentioned in the first episode. This method of body disposal, while not quite legal all around in the United States, this is a thing in other countries. I couldn't quite find legality of it except in science donation cases, but this may be the most eco-friendly option you can find. It is essentially leaving remains in nature to let nature take its course, whether it be exposure, wild animals, or at the top of a mountain for birds to feast on. This has been practiced since man or woman began, essentially. So far as I have discussed mostly options for remains as a whole, with a few options for cremations thrown in. But there are so many things to do with cremains outside of the options I mentioned, or keeping them in an urn on your mantle. I think I mentioned in a previous episode turning cremains into diamonds. There are a few different companies I found, and essentially it happens in a lab, and you get a lot of options, like color, size, type. For years, this was my go-to choice. I always imagined getting the me diamond put into a jewelry setting and passing me on for generations, almost like living forever in a way. Most likely, though, I would end up in a pawn shop by one of my great-grandkids or something like that. There are also options to have some of your cremains mixed into glass during the glass-making process and then shaped into whatever form you want. If your loved one was obsessed with sharks, you may want to have them made into a glass shark. Seems pretty cool. There is cremation jewelry and tree kits, and I'm certain many, many more options. I've even heard about having them put into a firework, so you can go out with a bang. The cool thing about cremains is that you can use as little or as much as you would like for a lot of options. So you can split them up and do many options depending on your budget. No matter what you decide to do with the cremains, your next step from there are deciding if you will do some kind of service or remembrance, and all the decisions that go with that. I believe everyone should have an obituary, and some type of ceremony to celebrate the life someone lived before they pass. I believe that is vital to grieving process, and to have that final goodbye, the laugh, the cry, the memories. At almost every funeral I've seen, and definitely at every obituary writing session, I could see the range of emotions involved in the grieving process. From funny stories and fond memories to crying for the loss. I've seen people laugh and cry in like a minute straight. I've watched many pass from just moment to moment, just from a picture. Planning some kind of remembrance, memorial, or celebration can be as big or as little as you choose. Remains or cremains can be present depending on choice and regulations and circumstances. I always like the idea of some kind of representation of your loved one being present at their goodbye party. It doesn't have to be a somber funeral. Depending on your cultural or religious views, you may have some guidelines to follow, and there are places that will meet those needs if you shop around. If you don't have those guidelines, you can do whatever you imagine these days. There are cases of extreme embalming, prop me up next to the jukebox, where you may attend your own memorial, weekend at Bernie's style. It could just be your cremains in a box. I think you should plan to be there, guest of honor and all that. Your memorial or celebration could be as rowdy or solemn as you want. For mine, I want to be there in some way. And I want it at a bar or somewhere like that with a beautiful remembrance video playing with finely selected music like Something I Loved. And I want everyone taking shots and randomly sharing stories of good and bad times. I want laughing and tears and maybe a couple of fights. After all, anger is part of grief. Mostly, I want everyone waking up the next morning feeling a sense of closure and being at peace with my loss and very hungover. I want those I love to remember me but be okay without me. What do we do to honor and remember your loved ones? Obituaries are a big deal. You may not think so, but it is. It is the simplest remembrance you can do for a loved one. Newspapers, at least in print and probably in their entirety, are becoming extinct. The days of submitting an obituary to the local paper announcing your loved one's passing are sadly ending. There are few reasons, mainly the death of the newspapers thanks to the internet. Video killed the radio star and internet killed the newspaper. Newspapers do still exist, though dying out rapidly. The problem is, because of this slow death, prices to print are rising. Obituaries cost way more than you imagine, with even the smallest obituary running at least $400. It is priced per word. So if you can't publish an obituary in the newspaper, why even do one? It is important for not just your own grieving process in publishing it, but also a way to let others know. I have a whole episode written up already for this subject, but suffice to say that whoever your loved one is that you are planning services for, whether it be a spouse, parent, grandparents, you should keep in mind that they had a whole life before you. If it's your adult children, they have a whole life after you. You do not know every experience someone has had or whose lives they have touched in some way. I once had this elderly man, very elderly, stop into the funeral home on a Sunday afternoon. I was alone and nothing was going on. I may even have been sitting there writing on my laptop. He was there to find a girl he dated in high school. He heard she had passed and wanted to find her grave. He regretted not having caught up with her before she passed. I helped him find the information and sent him on his way, but that wasn't an isolated incident. I got calls constantly with old friends, long-lost relatives, long-lost loves, looking to find out if someone died and trying to find out how to say goodbye. Obituaries these days can be published online and shared on social media, Social media can even be turned into in remembrance pages and kept alive in a sort of way after someone has died. I advise holding off, though, on any death announcements in general, especially on social media, until arrangements are made and finalized. That's just a general tip there. You'll thank me later. But once they are made, send out an obituary with information on the service and final disposition. In cases where prearrangements haven't been made and you need assistance with costs, this is also a good way to find that help. Along with obituaries, remembrance can come in other ways. Monuments, headstones, mausoleums, vaults, park benches, commemorative bricks, videos and pictures, and things you did in your life that touched others' lives. There are lots of ways to be remembered. This week, for the question of the week, how long does an autopsy take? If you find yourself facing an unexpected death, and sometimes even a suspected death, where there may be some questions surrounding an exact cause of death, you may unfortunately be met with navigating the autopsy side of death. This includes medical examiners and coroners, and sometimes private autopsy companies. This isn't always like on TV, and only when a crime occurs, like CSI. This can even be for cases where the death is completely expected and they just need to pin down a more exact cause, like maybe there's multiple illnesses. This is helpful in some cases, and there could be multiple reasons, and it's just more answers are needed. Next episode goes more into aspects of both expected and unexpected death. For now, to answer this question, an autopsy itself takes roughly 2 to 4 hours to complete. That won't happen right away, though. Depending on what the caseload looks like for the medical examiner or the coroner or, whoever's doing it, your loved one could be in the cooler for a little bit. The remains are generally released within 48 hours to the funeral home, roughly 24 to 48, and each state's laws may differ on timing and details about things. Results for autopsies, however, take a lot longer. While sometimes you can receive preliminary results within 2 to 3 days, the full results can take up to 6 weeks or longer. This depends on circumstances. Laboratory testing alone can take from days to weeks to complete. The more complex, the longer it takes. If they're checking for poisons and stuff like that with labs and multiple labs, it could go on and on. With an autopsy, you really hit a snag. You may receive an initial death certificate within a week. However, with an autopsy, there may be no cause of death for quite a while. While the initial death certificate may be used for things like closing accounts, it won't state any kind of cause of death. It'll be left empty or say to be determined or something like that, or unknown. And until it states something, you might not be able to accomplish some things like estate things or insurance until you get that cause of death, which could take months. It absolutely sucks for families waiting in limbo and not having that closure and being able to fully start the grieving process. And with that, our quote of the week: don't send me flowers when I'm dead. If you like me, send them while I'm alive. Brian Clough. Join me next week when I discuss expected and unexpected deaths and compare and contrast the differences and similarities between the two and how to navigate both a little easier. Thank you for listening to this episode of Passing Perspective with Death's Apprentice. I hope to have given you enough ideas to really start thinking about and researching ideas of your own for your own cremains and what remains. Talk to your family and friends and listen to their options. Offer up the idea of the funeral pyre or being shot into space and see what their reaction is. Maybe they had an even better idea. You won't know unless you ask. I would love to hear your own ideas about body disposal in a legal way and questions, anecdotes, or stories. You can find me on the web at www.passingperspective.com and on the socials, Facebook at Passing Perspectives and Instagram at Passing Perspective Podcast. Make sure to leave a review and follow. Passing Perspective can be found on all of your favorite streaming services, so give me a listen. Until next time, live long and prosper, my friends. Death's Apprentice. Thank you for listening to this episode of Passing Perspective with Death's Apprentice. All episodes are written, hosted, and produced by Death's Apprentice. Music is A Calm Hellfire by The Wayward Hearts. Licensing by Upbeat. Tune in for next week. See you then.